Hi, I'm Greeshma Kuthar, and you're listening to episode 1 of Mission Manipur, a frontline podcast that looks in detail at the Manipur conflict. This episode is titled Back to the Roots. When I think back to the first week of July in 2023, I can remember how close I was to giving up. I had just visited the village where David Thake, a 31-year-old Mar man, had been beheaded the previous day. His severed head was put up on a spike after his village was burned down. And there I was, pleading with the editor of an international news outlet that my report about this incident had to be published immediately rather than 3 weeks from then. It had been more than a month since I had been in Manipur. When I would make calls to friends back home, they told me there was no reportage about Manipur in the news. There was pin drop silence across India. But in the state, I was seeing people die almost every day. Kukizo villages were being burned down by armed Meitei men and mobs, with what seemed like full support of the state government, while armed men from both the communities were engaged in a gun battle across buffer zones. It was still some days before the short lived outrage that would erupt after a particular video would be shared on X, from where it would spread like wildfire. But I had to give up on hopelessness. I had to focus. So I found a village to lock myself in and began to write a cover story for the Caravan magazine, which was eventually titled Fire and Blood: How the BJP is Enabling Ethnic Cleansing in Manipur. I sat there in the middle of an internet clampdown with a bunch of books that I'd hunted down from a few personal libraries. I willed myself to remember every little detail that I had read about the history of the Bharatiya Janata Party in the state, which under its patronage had descended into an unprecedented civil war. It wasn't easy at all. I had definitely read about a senior Vishwa Hindu Parishad leader's work in Manipur in the 1970s, but I couldn't be sure about the exact details. I knew I had the VHP archives in my inbox, but I had to somehow access an internet connection to look it up. I decided to take a trip to the district collector's office, the only place with an internet connection in the vicinity. This place was an hour and a half away from where I was staying. The connection was so bad that my Gmail account wouldn't even load. I gave up and eventually forgot about it, as I drowned in 100 other details that were needed to stitch together that story. Today, it has been more than a year since that story. The war in Manipur hasn't stopped. As I started my prep for this episode, I hunted down that archive I could not access in 2023. And I was right. The Hindu Vishwa, the newsletter of the VHP, refers to how Vishwatirtha, a powerful guru from one of the Udupi mutts, adopted Manipur as his field of work. Vishwatirtha was no ordinary guru. He was among the formative members of VHP and went on to lead the Ram Janmabhoomi movement from South India. I had spent a good part of 2018 researching about Vishwatirtha. During that time, I was told about his work in the Northeast. But why was I looking him up in the first place? Well, one of my first assignments as a journalist was to investigate the reasons behind the rifts and the divisiveness in the Tulu speaking region of Karnataka. This was in 2018. Incidents of lynchings over cow meat, false narratives about interreligious love, and communal incidents had flared up in the small pocket. And at the center of it was the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Their grip on the region is unlike anywhere else in the South. My job at the time was to figure out how it had come to that. As a young person in my 20s, I was just beginning to understand the extent of the work of the RSS. What was supposed to be a 2 week assignment stretched out into months. I waded through archives spanning decades, many of which had repeated mentions of Vishwatirtha. Somewhere in the middle of a 600-page archive of the Hindu Vishwa, I caught this mention of Vishwatirtha adopting Manipur to realize the objective of the VHP there. The VHP was formed in 1964 at the behest of the RSS. By now, the RSS was setting up multiple fronts to further the cause of Hindu nationalism, but with limited success. During this time, a group of religious gurus came together under the banner of VHP, where they pledged to safeguard Hindu Dharma and to organize and awaken Hindu society. They laid out their objectives in the first few meetings of the VHP. One of them detailed the plan of action that the VHP intended to take in the Northeast, and I quote, open quote, the need was felt to go immediately to those areas where Islam and the church had been striking the hardest. In this respect, the northeastern Bharat was the most sensitive zone. RSS leaders believed the church was not only converting the people but also sowing the seeds of disaffection, separatism, and secessionism. They tried to coach the Vanavasis and Girivasis and other nationals in the remotest areas that you are animists. and not Hindus. Therefore, you have nothing in common with other people of India. In this way, they tried to cut off those brethren from the national mainstream. Muslim infiltrators from the then East Pakistan were setting up their illegal bases inside Assam. We studied all these situations and our service projects were started in Assam, first among which were organizing 3 conventions in Assam zone. The presence of Naga Rani Gaidenlu and other leaders from Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, and Mizoram was very encouraging. Sri Guruji Golwalkar was present for all the 3 days. A decision was arrived on to renovate the famous Indian pilgrimage place Parashurama Kund, situated in Arunachal Pradesh on the borders of Tibet and Myanmar. Towards this end, the Parashurama Kund Vikas Samiti was registered in 1967. A temple was constructed and an icon of Bhagavan Parashuram was also installed in it. In the 1966 convention at Guwahati, it was highlighted that animism is a basic feature of Hindu worldview as the Rig Veda invokes various forces of Mother Nature to endow man with happiness, health, and blessedness. Animism is the worldview that says that non human entities also possess a spiritual essence. Animism may further attribute souls to abstract concepts such as words, true names, or metaphors in mythology. Therefore, the forces with vested interests and evil agendas on Bharat have been deliberately trying to engineer secessionism. All the people indigenous to the land between the Himalayas and the Sindhus are Hindus, whose worldview is holistic, altruistic, and syncretic, that is, loftier than the Himalayas and deeper than the oceans. End quote. I have come across many such efforts of the VHP in the Northeast with vivid details in their archives. The assimilation of indigenous religions, as it is described in the excerpt that I read out, were some of the first steps that the RSS took in the region. Much like elsewhere in India, the myth of Parashurama also made it all the way to the borders of India, even though this myth, as written by sociologist Iravati Karve, is at best an obscure myth. Rani Gaidenlu, a Rongmai Naga leader whose presence at the VHP convention is mentioned in the newsletter, has been projected by the RSS over and over again to insinuate that everything tribal means Hindu. What is amusing is that it was the Congress leadership that was the one to associate her identity and religion with Hinduism initially, and not the RSS. Even as the RSS was trying to drag Northeast India into the Hindu nationalist framework, the Congress governments were also doing the same. There are numerous examples in the present that show the extent of the success of the RSS in the Hinduization of tribal religions, from Donupalo in Arunachal Pradesh to different tribal religions in Assam. The Hinduization of the Brahmaputra River, an initiative of the BJP government of Assam, is one such example. Like the other Hindu festivals celebrated across rivers in mainland India, a festival called the Namami Brahmaputra was organized in 2017 by the BJP. Anthropologist Mithul Barua, who is from the Majauli Islands that are at the center of this river, has conducted extensive ethnographic fieldwork in different parts of the Brahmaputra Valley. He said, and I quote, "Nowhere have I come across any instances of worshipping the Brahmaputra." End quote. At the same time, Mithul questions the intention of the state in prioritizing a festival like this rather than making plans to control the havoc that floods bring to the valley every year. Different projects such as these have been in the churn since the RSS entered the region in 1946. Among the more common ones are RSS volunteers offering their services during calamities or in poor neighborhoods in order to penetrate into the communities. Masoyo Hunpun Avungshi investigated such methods, which accelerated the spread of the RSS in the region, for a report in the Caravan. Over conversations with members of the Sangh, she pieced together how the Sangh's organizations, from the Vanavasi Kalyan Ashram to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Samiti, used education as a tool to further their reach across the northeastern states. By the end of the 1970s, every district in Assam had a shaka. More than 7,000 Ekal Vidyalayas have been set up. These are Sangh-run schools offering free, in quotes, holistic education with an emphasis on imparting nationalism and family values. The RSS facilitates sending thousands of poor students to RSS affiliated schools across the country. These are mostly tribal children who are removed from their homes and taken to these schools where they are taught to be everything but their original selves. Some attend Sangh run institutions, while others attend government schools while living in Sangh hostels. Masoyo found out that many of these students returned home to become high ranking officials in the government while also being RSS workers. Arkutong Longkumar's The Greater India Experiment is a must read for all of those who want to understand the work of the Sangh in the Northeast. While reading this book, I had multiple deja vu moments convincing me that the RSS might try different methods across the country, from the Tulu region down south to Assam in the Northeast, but their methods are the same. I'm going to read out an excerpt from the book describing the schools run by the RSS. Open quote. When I visited many of these VHP, Vidya Bharati, and Janajati Vikas Samiti schools all over the Northeast, providing sanctuary to tribal children, I was unprepared for the scale of their involvement, and I often wondered at what price. Looking at the visual material in these schools, ranging from quotes from eminent figures, maps, painted images of deities to pictures of the goddess Lakshmi, Bharat Mata, or even a cross stitched decoration of the Sanskrit syllable Om, reminded me of a quote in one of the classrooms of the Zelingrong Heraka School in Tening, Nagaland, run with the help of the Janajati Vikas Samiti. The quote by Ramakrishna reads, "Knowledge leads to unity, ignorance to diversity." In this quote, these Sanskritized forms of messages make a presence and form mental maps in an attempt to organize, to forge a certain route through which knowledge is gained, and to simplify diverse and rich narratives to a story of oneness, a gradual but seemingly inevitable process of creating a totalizing force. These ideas of oneness also manifest in practical matters like food, musical instruments, and connectivity. I met an older woman who had come from Mumbai as part of My Home is India, a program run by Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad. She volunteered to come to Tening for 6 months and participate in teaching and helping the young girls in the Hiraka school hostel. Perhaps she wanted to talk to someone outside of the community, so she confided in me about her problems of living in isolation with no internet. She confessed that being a vegetarian was challenging in Tening. The local community accommodated her diet restrictions, but the choice of food was limited. She also said that she was exhausted because she could not get the girls to learn the sitar, a musical instrument popular in many parts of India but not in Nagaland. I suggested the guitar as a more appropriate choice among the Naga youth, but she insisted that the sitar has a history as a classical Indian instrument. So surely, she exclaimed, the student should be interested due to its established pedigree. I wondered about the My Home is India project's success, whose goal is to bring emotional integration among people of different regions, and in particular to bridge the gap between the people of Northeast India and the rest of India. Of course, it's unfair to judge the success of My Home is India through anecdotal evidence, but it does highlight some of the issues where idealism and day to day practicalities collide. End quote. Arco's observations are identical to my research on these schools in the Tulu region. I had visited a similar RSS school in Bantwal of the Tulu region, which was founded by senior RSS leader Prabhakar Bhatt. The school was identical to the schools Arco describes in his book, and I was told the composition of the school in Bantwal was 90% SC, ST, OBC children. Everything that I saw in the school is ditto to what Arco has described, from the Sanskrit chanting to the imagery. The only difference here was a life size cutout of Dr. Ambedkar stood next to Savarkar. I was taken from class to class where the children recited Sanskrit slokas, which I'm sure they didn't understand just like me. During the tour, Prabhakar Bhatt told me multiple times that this is what nation building means. Much like what Arco summarizes as the sum result of the programs that he saw in the schools that he visited. Along with this form of targeted indoctrination, there was also a churning within the states and the borderlands, which the RSS used in ways that would benefit its national agenda. I found a state by state description of how the Sangh viewed the problems of the northeastern states in another Hindu Vishwa newsletter. Open quote, problems of Hindus in northeastern region in a nutshell. Assam. Muslim infiltrators from Bangladesh are instigating the Bengali Hindus to join hands with them to fight jointly the deputation forces. One organization named Assam Jatyavadi Dal is preaching against non Assamese Hindus, vitiating the whole atmosphere of peace in the state. Meghalaya. The state government is dominated by the Christian influence, and as such, it never protects the rights of Hindus. The Christian citizens are terrorizing the Ramakrishna mission, the only oasis for the protection of Hindu culture. Manipur. Taking cue from tribal terrorists, the Meitei revivalists are creating violence against old Hindu Dharma, which is being followed by nearly 12 lakhs of Manipuris in the Manipur Valley. Tripura. Christian tribals, abetted by their foreign masters, have won an autonomous district for them, extending their grip over the state funds. Hindus apprehended a gradual extinction at the former's hands. As such, Tripura is on the verge of a civil war. Mizoram. 50,000 Chakmas are experiencing maltreatment from the Christians. They have no spokesman. Nagaland. Hindu Nagas are disorganized and have no say in the affairs of Nagaland, which belongs equally to Hindu and Christian Nagas. Rani Gaidenlu, the unsurmountable Hindu Naga leader, safeguarding the identity and religion, our trustee, needs all cooperation. Arunachal Pradesh. The non Christian tribals, numbering nearly 500,000, are apprehensive of the Christian penetration into this union territory from the adjoining state of Nagaland and Assam. The state government has enacted a law safeguarding the identity and religion of these innocent tribals. Now, Christian MPs, supported by some over enthusiastic secular Hindu politicians, are fighting a battle in our parliament for repeal of this useful law. End quote. What is clear from these archives is that the work of the Sangh Parivar from the 1970s up until its first electoral victory in the Northeast in 2016 did not stray too far from what is already defined in the descriptions that I just read out. Xenophobic theories around immigration, not just of Muslims, but other tribes that are seen as non local, of indigenous faith being in danger by Abrahamic religions, and hence assimilation to safeguard identity, Islamophobia in the name of protection of land. These were all to take center stage, slowly binding the states together. But the RSS also slowly evolved by using formulas exclusive to each state. This is how the BJP boasts of alliances with parties in Christian majority states such as Nagaland and Mizoram, even as RSS affiliates openly advocate taking away reservation for Christian tribals. In the build up towards the demolition of the Babri Masjid, India plummeted headlong into decades of communal violence. At the same time, the country was also witnessing anti reservation protests. This is when insurgency in the Northeast reached its peak. Alongside these insurrections came a churning that emanated from the deep ethnic insecurities that are endemic in almost every state in the region. Assam and Arunachal Pradesh were the epicenters for the region in this regard, stemming from the response of the state's leadership before, during, and after the war with East Pakistan and China, respectively. Assam was already in the thick of a linguistic battle between the Assamese and the Bengalis when the new country of Bangladesh emerged. From this came the Assamese movement, which centered on the anxiety of Bangladeshi infiltrators, in quotes, changing the demography of Assam. The RSS came out in support of the Assamese nationalists, who initially said they were against all refugees. But slowly, the RSS was able to mainstream the notion that Hindu refugees are victims, while Muslim refugees are just opportunists. It has been a downward spiral since then, from the Nellie massacre to the recent Citizenship Amendment Act fueled Islamophobia. Throughout this time, the BJP was able to pit the Congress party, which was seen as a party of feudal elites, against smaller regional parties, much as it did in the rest of India. Many of these smaller parties worked with the BJP over the years, some of them even signing peace accords, and many of them went on to join the Northeast Democratic Alliance, a political coalition that was formed in 2016 by BJP. All northeastern states except Mizoram are under BJP rule now. The history of the Indian National Congress has been of centering the elite, feudal, Brahmin, or a dominant community in the Northeast. Like the Ahoms in Assam, Meiteis in Manipur, Bengalis in Tripura, or whoever was convenient for them among the tribes in the other states. Communities such as the Mizos and the Naga tribes felt that the Congress hasn't done enough to understand their demands and have believed that the Congress actually has done more against them than for them historically. This is where the BJP's strategy of appealing to the smallest of the smallest groups comes into the picture. RSS men, from Golwalkar to Ram Madhav to Ram Lal to BL Santosh, have slowly engaged with smaller communities and tribes over decades, helping bring each one of them within the common minimum program of the Sangh in the Northeast. This doesn't mean their state leadership was any different from the Congress. Of course not. It was the same dominant communities as before, but this time with the support of smaller players. I'm going to leave it to your imagination to understand how these players were coaxed by the BJP to join them. The BJP's tactics are no longer a secret. Ethnic majoritarianism has become the mainstay of many parts of the Northeast, with the head of the NIDA, the Assam Chief Minister Himanta Sharma, even openly threatening violence against Muslims in his state. At the assembly, Himanta said, and I quote, "I will take sides. I won't let Mia Muslims take over Assam." End quote. Such statements coming from a Brahmin man aren't shocking. Brahmin men have been the front runners in steering anti Muslim behavior in India, which we can trace back to the 1800s, even before the coming of the RSS. But when I heard similar language in a hill district of Manipur during my reportage, I felt chills. It took me back to grappling with how my own family started using such language, even though I never saw such language coming from them as a child. The Muslim berries and the non Muslim Tulu people share similar ethnic roots. So, how are my folks suddenly hating their own? I have thought about this 100 times. I have asked myself over and over again how within decades you can hate somebody you share an oral history with. While this experience is vastly different from what is happening in the Northeast, the game plan seems to be the same. It is to design hatred around what is positioned as unfamiliar to your culture, be it a Muslim who has been at the center of this global hate program, or a small tribe that you see as a means to mobilize yourself. This othering has been a systemic exercise not exclusive to the RSS. Caste is kept alive across India by othering and institutionalizing othering. But the RSS and its local actors have excelled in this game much better than the others. The demolition of the Babri Masjid being their most successful project in this category. How else will a group sitting in the Tulu region that has no mention of a Ram or a Sita in their history suddenly look at their neighbors, the Beri Muslims, with blood in their eyes? Similar othering has happened in pockets that tap into the local context across the Northeast. What does it mean when Chief Minister Biren Singh in Manipur says some Kukizo people are from Manipur while some are illegal? What does it mean for CM Himanta Sharma to say some Muslims are Assamese while most others are not? What does it mean for the RSS to say Chakmas are persecuted by Christians in Mizoram while doing the same in Arunachal Pradesh where they are in power? When othering is driven by those in political positions of power, it becomes a state exercise. This then goes on to create ethnic polarization between communities. This is the Sangh Parivar's long drawn project in the Northeast, and the first casualty is what is unfolding now in Manipur. More about that in my next episode. Before I wrap up, a note of thank you to journalists and writers from the Northeast who've helped me understand a region that I don't belong to. Here are some references that have helped me prepare for this episode. Arco's book that I've already mentioned has been a go to for me since I read it a couple of years back. This book is called The Greater India Experiment Hindutva and the Northeast. Identity and Marginality in Northeast India by Hoineiling Sitlo. Christianity and Politics in Tribal India by Kanato Choppy. The essay on Manipur by Tingnam Kishan Singh in the book Proselytization in India, the process of Hinduization in tribal societies. All the reportage of the journalists I've mentioned during the episode, along with the writings of Manoranjan Pegu, Makepeace Sitlo, Richard Kamei, Kimi Kolne, Suraj Gogoi, and Jyoti Bania. As a bonus, here are two fiction books that you can read just to vibe with the stories that, of course, will have details that will help you, sitting in a corner of Chennai, understand the Northeast better. Name Place Animal Thing by Dariba and The Many That I Am, edited by Anungla Zoe. Lastly, I want to do what a bunch of people have done in pop culture, from Snoop Dogg to Viola Davis. I want to thank myself. Being an independent journalist in India right now is like swimming in an ocean. You don't know which way to go, the sun is dehydrating you, and you can't drink the water you're swimming in. The predicament is very real, and our response to this has mostly been plotting different careers, from being bakers to librarians to whatnot. But guess what? In spite of all of that, many of us are still around. So I do have to thank the editor of Frontline, Vaishna here, who has let me do my thing, has trusted my journalism and whatever eccentric idea I bring to the table, including this podcast. Thank you for listening in. I shall be back with another episode as soon as I can.